So I just finished rereading this, and I have to tell you, there's so many searing insights in this, but I want to ask you about it if I can. But first, just in keeping with what I initially told you I wanted to ask, I hope you can talk a little bit about your personal journey to speaking truth to power, 50 years ago now, when you were a really young person walking those halls of power in the White House. You describe it, really meticulously. I also hold this up for kids to see, Blind Ambition, um, which I highly recommend. But I'm hoping you can share with us today just kind of the dangers of falling prey to, overzealous politics and a charismatic politician and leader and hero of yours who, had kind of a win at all costs mindset.
I was, relatively speaking, very young when I went to the White House.
Yeah.
Uh, in 30 years of age, I was 6 years out of law school.
Wow.
When I was offered the job, I really understood that what they were really offering me was the title Counsel to the President. That my predecessor, John Ehrlichman, was going to move over to another rank in the White House and be the president's chief domestic advisor. And Ehrlichman, who was White House counsel, uh, really had gotten a pretty good sense of the way the place worked and realized the counsel's office didn't have a big impact on domestic policy, which he wanted. So I understood all that because he tried to lean on the Department of Justice where I was working.
All right.
And there was a good bit of friction between John Mitchell, the Attorney General, and John Ehrlichman. So I had to clear the invitation to come to the White House with the Attorney General. And I was advised, don't go there. Stay at the Department of Justice, and you're going to go up in the ranks here. I was the Associate Deputy Attorney General, which was a great job. I was in charge of liaison between the Department of Justice and the Congress, where I had also worked as a committee counsel. That had been my first job in government. So I knew my way around the Hill. In fact, in the larger picture of the story we're talking about, I really understood Washington better than most of the people I worked for. I had gone to law school there. I had been a student of government. I had studied for a master's degree on the presidency when I interrupted with that by going to law school. But I did understand the way the city worked better than the Nixon team after they won, when they came in and took over the government, which in the end would play to my benefit in the greater scheme of things. But anyway, I did go to the White House at a young age, at 31. Mitchell had said, don't go. But he said, I understand why you can't turn down that title at 31 years of age. And that's exactly right. I would go over to the White House and do the grunt work of the White House counsel's office. Ehrlichman would be the person who actually met with the president. And not until after disaster had befallen the White House did the president start calling on me. And all my meetings with the president, unbeknownst to me at the time, but suspected a little bit as I testified about it, were recorded. And I have like 37 one-on-one meetings with Nixon. I think 35 of them are on tape, or there are recordings of them. They're now MP3 tapes or MP4, some of them. And so there's a record of everything I had to say in all my exchanges with Nixon. And I'm not unhappy with any excepting one. My first really wasn't one-on-one. I was in there with the chief of staff, Bob Haldeman. And I knew that the way to get ahead with Nixon was to suck up, which the staff tended to do. And I hear myself sucking up to him. Oh, that's a wonderful idea, when he's saying some nasty things. And I realized after the meeting, I said, I just can't do that. and never did it again in any of my other conversations with Nixon.
Wow.
So my September 72 meeting with him is the only one that makes me cringe. The other ones I have no problem with.
That's a pretty good average then, if there was only one. Tell me, I mean, that's really heady, to be involved at that level at that young of an age. And I know, there was so much that was very admirable about Nixon and his policies and his awareness of government and his devotion to the country. But, but, um, can you talk a little bit about the thought process you went through and the decisions that you had to start making in 1973 once you realized that the lust for power and the willingness to break laws to manipulate the election and all these wrongdoings were going on?
Let me put Watergate in a little broader context for you.
Okay.
Most people think Watergate, they think a bungled burglary and cover up.
Right.
Uh, that really isn't what Watergate is about. Watergate is the name given to a scandal that is triggered by a bungled burglary
Right.
uh, in 1972 during the president's reelection campaign when his campaign operatives are caught in the opponent's headquarters and arrested. And everybody thinks, well, that couldn't happen without the president and his hierarchy knowing. Well, in fact, they didn't. This was something that was a campaign operation, and I have never, over all these years, seen any evidence that Richard Nixon ordered the break-in into the Watergate, into the Democratic National Committee headquarters. He was as stunned and as surprised as everybody else. And the White House initially is trying to figure out what in the world has gone on, and it takes them a little while to put together what is going on. But the problem for the White House was that people who had worked at the White House had been ushered off of the staff of the White House and placed at the re-election committee, a fellow
Mhm.
by the name of Gordon Liddy,
Right.
who thought he was James Bond, but really wasn't quite Maxwell Smart,
Right.
for people who watch old television. And he was a screwball, and he had dreams of glory that were just unrealistic about what he could do as an intelligence gatherer for the re-election committee. Anyway, when Watergate first happens, and to understand it, it is the bungle burglary that starts it. But the men who are involved have been involved while working for the Nixon White House in another venture
Right.
that after a man by the name of Daniel Ellsberg leaked a highly classified study on the origins of the war in Vietnam, a study that became known as the Pentagon Papers. Nixon wanted to find out who the hell this guy was and prosecute him
Right.
because he was concerned it would affect his ability to govern as well. But rather than turn it over to the FBI and the normal channels, they did this in the basement of the White House. I didn't know about it at the time. In fact, I had once gotten wind of an incredible activity this group was planning to get what they thought was another edition of these papers,
The
which were at a think tank in Washington, the Brookings Institute. And a New York City detective who had worked for my predecessor and had been assigned to my staff, who I had no idea what to do with, but he continued to work for my predecessor, who was an assistant to the president. But he sort of reported he was on my staff budget. So he one day in July of 1972, no, 71, came in my office. This was a few months after the release of the Pentagon Papers, and told me, he said, John, I have been assigned by another senior aide, Chuck Colson, to firebomb the Brookings Institute. I said, to what? he said, yes, they want me to firebomb the Brookings Institute and go in and get some papers that the White House thinks belong to the government, and to get those papers when they before the fire department responds, they will have their own fire department men go in and break the safe of the Brookings Institute and get these papers out and retrieve them. I said, Jack, I said, that's crazy. That's just craziness. And I flew out and met with my predecessor, John Ehrlichman. I said, John, this is insane. And he picked up the phone and got a hold of Colson and said, Chuck, young Council Dean is out here and doesn't think the Brookings plan is a very good one. Cancel it. And that was that. I years later learned that because of my action, I was considered something of a little old lady around the White House. So I was not told when they created this investigative unit to go after the Pentagon Papers and to try to do that investigation himself rather than the FBI. They thought the FBI was dragging its feet on the Ellsberg investigation. But anyway, it's the people involved in the Ellsberg inquiry who clearly are reporting directly to John Ehrlichman and working for one of his aides, Bud Krogh, and another Kissinger aide by the name of David Young. And they're up to all kinds of nonsense. And it's that activity that the White House is concerned about when all these same guys
Right,
are arrested in the Watergate.
right.
And why the Watergate is an issue. Had that not been the case, I suspect they would have let the campaign committee hang out to dry, and that would have been it. But no, this goes back right to the White House and begins to unfold a whole bunch of this craziness. So that's the link.
Right, right. It was just one of many tentacles of this kind of subversion of campaigns, right, and elections.
So you asked me, the question I have not answered is how did I decide my feelings about all this? And as I mentioned, I don't start dealing with Nixon personally in any of this until February of 1973. He calls me at the end of the month on the 27th, and he asked me to come over to his office. And this is when we first began talking one-on-one. I know from his diary entries he later shared in his memoirs, he likes me. He sort of thinks he's found a jewel on his staff that he didn't know existed. And I like him. He's clearly highly intelligent, very knowledgeable, but doesn't know much about Watergate. He hasn't been really kept in the loop at all. I'm surprised that how little he has been told. So he has been often not informed, and that was putting together the pieces now by design. He didn't want to know about Watergate and what was being done or not done. That is part of the problem. Will come back and haunt him later. In fact, he will claim as his defense that he didn't know anything about a cover-up until I came in and told him on March 21st of 1973, which today I know is a lie. And I did a book called The Nixon Defense, where I had a team of grad students who transcribed all Nixon's Watergate conversations. And it's clear he's in varying degrees involved right from the outset, as he will later lose his presidency when that is discovered, because he's lied and said, listen, I didn't know anything until my White House counsel came in and told me in March that there's this cover-up going on and these people are demanding hush money and all kinds of things. Well, of course, that wasn't true.